All right, guys, welcome back to another class. Today's class is going to be about the sheriff. Now that VCT is finally done and, I've had a chance to look over all of the games, they were kind of overnight for me. I've noticed that there's a couple of things that had to be really put forward. And that was the eco weapons, the way that teams were using eco weapons, the way that players are using that to kind of get an advantage, and how you can translate that into ranked. Now, when it comes to me in general, I always tell my students that the sheriff is a weapon that is worth picking up. It's a weapon that you should always think about. It's a weapon that has a lot of pros and not very many cons. There's a lot of things that you can always do with the sheriff. And today I'm hoping to show you guys what those benefits are and things you can do to practice the weapon. Okay. Thank you for everybody that's been subscribing. A lot of support still. Okay. I do appreciate you guys a lot. And hopefully I can keep providing content to you guys that does match what you guys are looking for. All right, let's get started. The content is going to be very simple. We're going to talk about why the sheriff, and I'm not telling you to pick up the stinger. The stinger's used up a lot. The marshal's used up a lot. The outlaw, you can kind of consider as sort of an eco weapon, half eco weapon. All these weapons are a thing. Why the sheriff, right? There's a lot of things that do kind of tie up to why you should be using the sheriff. And most of them are going to be related to kind of the movement, the feel, and how cheap it is in comparison to other weapons. Then we're going to talk about whether you should be doing it every single eco round or you should be buying it on round 2, right? These are questions that I get asked a bunch. And last but not least, the competition. I already talked about some of the weapons, but I'm going to give you guys some sort of point form notes that you can use in case you want to think about, maybe I'm in this position, maybe I won't use the sheriff, I'll use this weapon instead. So that's something that comes in for the end. But to give you guys the answer, to put it short, I do think it's worth learning. Let's get right into it. As always, I get us started with the simple basics of, I'm still taking in students. Right now, I have 2 students right now with me. And the latest one, within a week, they were actually able to get from Plat 2 to Plat 3. Really proud of them. And based on our short-term goals, we're actually getting somewhere. The other student that I'm currently with, I'm working very closely to ensure that they're doing a really good job of just kind of maintaining that mechanic ability and translating that into more carry and impact potential. So I'm really hoping to see a lot more from them. Okay, but again, it's completely open. If you're going to have any conversations with me outside of it, you're always welcome to do so and ask about this. Okay, but let's move on to that, onto the class. First things first. Okay, what are the strengths of the sheriff? It's not just if I hit the headshot, I win. There's a lot more to it. When you buy a sheriff, you're essentially giving yourself a guarantee that if you use your mechanics properly, you're going to be changing the tide of a fight. There's been a lot of rounds where just essentially picking only sheriffs has been beneficial, again, in both pro play and in ranked. And I'm going to be showcasing one round near the end, just kind of showing how I was able to use the sheriff alongside my team and just creating a strategy around our weapons, right? Another thing that's really good about it, it's that it's very cheap. Normally players ask me, what should I do on round 3? What should I do on ecos? And what a lot of people tend to do is they gravitate towards something like the Spectre or the Bulldog, right? If they think they just have enough credits, and they don't think about the utility. They don't think about the round right after. They don't really think about that type of stuff. If you're someone that likes to use the sheriff, then that means that you're already used to playing at a disadvantage. Normally when you buy the weapon, you're either considering maybe not buying an extra flash, or maybe you're not buying full shield, assuming everything goes wrong. But it's so cheap that you can still use it to win the round that you're currently on. In ranked, getting kills, unfortunately, is the way that things are meant to be done. Combat score is essentially telling you that if you're not getting kills, you're not being impactful, you're not going to get RR. And I think this weapon does fit the way that ranked likes to function. If you're always in a potential of getting a kill, if you're always in that position, you're going to be fine. It's actually viable in most situations. So whether it's short, long, medium range, you're always going to be finding yourself at a good angle, but that takes learning into consideration, right? You have to make sure that you learn those angles and you're practicing with it. And I'll talk about that in just a couple slides or in the slide after, right? And last but not least, you're never sacrificing a rifle. If you buy a Spectre or a Bulldog, you're sacrificing not having a rifle in the next round while everybody else is buying. Let's say somebody likes to buy a Stinger and somebody else has enough money to buy a Bulldog for next round, right? You can still invest in something like a sheriff and still have a rifle next round without having to worry about the repercussions of you not getting a kill. As you're still, like I mentioned, you're still going to be able to maybe lose a flash or maybe lose the full shield, but you'll still have a half shield rifle or full rifle, full shield with maybe a little bit less utility. Depending on the character that you use, you're always going to benefit from this weapon. And I think you should be looking at it closely as a weapon you should pick up. When we're looking, however, as to how do you practice it, if you paid attention to the last class that I put up, I gave up some of the methods and some training drills that you can use in deathmatch. I don't think that deathmatch is the only extent of how you can practice the sheriff. It is still, like a one-shot machine. So the way that you kind of play it all has to do with, your ability to micro adjust. So look at playlists that focus on precision. If you have any that you are kind of curious about, I can put some in the comments if you ask, or you can just ask me directly in the Discord channel. As for things that you should be looking at, it's the Miyagi method and zone defense. Zone defense because you need to focus on your micro adjustments and you need to make sure that you're focusing on the angles. So putting yourself in different positions where you have to hold a zone with the sheriff will easily impact how quickly you're learning your angle holding and how quickly you're getting used to, the ability to play. Secondly, with the Miyagi method, you need to get used to the patience. Spraying it is not going to help you. There's very few instances where spraying is going to be good for you, but more often than not, you're going to be looking at a clip back of you using the sheriff and you're mostly spraying. Make sure you're controlling that. Using this clip here, I'm going to show you some things that you need to keep in mind. Number one, you're going to notice how I killed this first guy. And this is tip number one when you're using the sheriff. You can actually use the first two bullets as very accurate. You can think of them as pretty much next to each other in terms of accuracy. So you can always spray the first two bullets when you're standing still to try to guarantee the shot. So the first two bullets are really, really accurate. You should be looking at that when you're trying to learn the sheriff. And that's the first tip for you. The second tip is the movement is closer to a pistol than it is a rifle. You're going to see in this position right here, notice how much I'm moving. I'm always on the move and I'm still able to hit accurate shots despite the fact that in a rifle, it wouldn't necessarily fly. I'm moving faster because the weapon is a pistol, so I would have the movement bonus, and I'm actually able to have a little bit more leeway when I'm playing. And this is why I see people telling me that, oh, I'm really good with the sheriff, but I can't use the rifle. This might be a reason why. There's just a lot more leeway. You have to focus a little bit less, on that, quote unquote dead zoning or focusing on that stopping power, making sure that you're stopping before you shoot, right? You still have that available to you. So these are things you should be paying attention to when you're practicing this weapon. Aside from those two tips, try those two drills and try to look at playlists that focus primarily on mechanics that are micro adjustments or just flicks, because you're mostly flicking with this weapon. Okay. Next thing, common strategies for the sheriff. This one is just for those that kind of have questions as to when you use it and whatnot. I think the strategy of the sheriff is pretty straightforward. If you're on an eco, you can just buy it. Most of the time, you're not going to regret your decision unless you're someone that is not confident in that weapon. And that's when you have to put a little bit more investment behind your thoughts. Okay. Having a plan and maybe having a strong rationale as to why you're playing the sheriff might be tough for those that are still learning it, but there's still always something to benefit from it. So for example, I always tell my students in ranked, you can buy it second round. That third round, everybody has full shield, full rifle, full utility. That losing half shield is not really the reason you're going to lose the round. If you guys lose the round, it's for an entirely different reason, right? So buying it second round is feasible. It's actually a viable option if you want to remain on the fight. It's also really useful for duelists because duelists need to be able to take fights and their kits are very cheap. So that's another thing to consider. Other things to look at is just simply, maybe I just want to destroy their eco. You don't have to focus on things like maybe a weapon that may or may not do damage versus something like a sheriff. I can destroy their entire shield and even potentially get kills with the sheriff. Whereas other weapons, I kind of maybe relying on luck or the stopping power of the weapon might not be enough. I know that some people like to go towards the ghost, and the ghost requires patience and is still really good. But for me, the sheriff is more bang for your buck and it's a lot better to use. Other things that you need to look at, there's some things to consider in terms of like skill versus strategy. So for example, if you're picking a longer range angle, you are very easily able to gravitate towards something like the sheriff versus something like a sight on Haven. Very close range, maybe you don't pick it. You might actually be better off picking a shorty, right? So make sure that you're kind of tying your rationale with some of the fights that you're going to be taking. If you feel really confident in terms of skill though, you can be like me and just pick it every single time there's an eco. Confidence is key. Lock in your choice. If you decide to pick the weapon, that means you're ready to go. Regardless of the option, you're not going to have as many downsides. As long as you're not buying full shield, full kit, sheriff, you're going to be fine on that eco, even if you just bought the sheriff without a shield. Okay. And this is where the next little bit kind of comes in, right? Is it the best eco weapon? I'm sure that if you guys look at other videos, they'll talk about why the Stinger is the better weapon. They'll talk about why the Marshall's the better weapon, really good hip fire accuracy. They'll talk about why you should be investing in the Outlaw, why you should be investing in the shotguns, right? They're always going to have a point, but this one is mine. 90% of the time, you're going to have more benefits from just buying the Sheriff outright, because the benefits will either come now as you get a kill or later as you're not going to be losing as much. So for example, if you buy a Stinger, you're putting in a couple extra credits that you could be using for shield. You could be using that for a flash. You could be using that for something else. If you're not good with the Sheriff, however, I would recommend taking that sacrifice. Let's say, for example, you get kills with the Sheriff. You're now able to now use this for later rounds. Maybe it's round 2. You're able to use this to fight maybe Stingers or other weapons that are playing close range. Like, for example, round 2, I'm playing against maybe, for example, Spectres. I can beat them at long range. Now I can translate this into a very quick third round, right? So there's going to always be a benefit to picking the Sheriff as opposed to other weapons. So you either get the kills and you get your eco up, or you destroyed their eco, or you bought a weapon that even if you did die, it doesn't really affect your choices to begin with. You can still buy your kit, you can still buy your rifle. You might have to take a small sacrifice as to what you pick, but that's about it. There is some context to keep in mind though, because there are some things that you should be aware. Just because you can buy the Sheriff every single round doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to the enemy team. And this is where you have to look at what they could do. If they're going to be rushing with Breach ult, don't pick a Sheriff. Like, they're just going to bombard you and you're not going to be able to leave. Just keep that in mind. Number 2, if you're picking against Sage or Deadlock, you're probably not going to benefit from it. Most of the time that I see players pick this weapon, they don't really think about that, and they go onto a lane where there's a Sage wall or a Deadlock wall, and they're stuck using the majority of their ammo just spamming at a wall without getting any benefits from it. In that position, you're probably better off going with your team, going fast with weapons with fast fire rates, okay? If you're not confident yet, okay, like I said, choose a Stinger. It almost works in very similar scenarios. It just has the long range aspect of it taken away, and it's a little bit more expensive. It's still a weapon that's picked up by pros, so it's a really close second weapon for me. If you're a little bit better off than maybe the Marshall, but the Marshall has been kind of hit or miss, and the maps that we're going to be playing are going to be a little bit less close range in my opinion, right? There's some benefits like Split is going to be coming and Pearl's going to be coming in. So those ones might change the tide as to how much I think about the Marshall, but for now, I wouldn't think of it right now. This weapon's more versatile and you're probably going to be better off with the cost of it. So you get more bang for your buck. So let's talk about the alternatives just to close off the video. If you cannot use the Sheriff, or you're still practicing the Sheriff, or you haven't had enough reps and you don't feel confident, what are alternatives? Again, you can pick weapons like the Bucky or the Stinger if you're going to be playing close range. Pick close range maps. For example, let's say you're playing A site on Haven. You're playing B site on Bind. You're playing any of those, for example, right? You can pick that site. Like, for example, Split's coming back. B site, really good for that. You can pick these weapons and still be good. Notice how I said eco weapons and I didn't choose something like the other shotgun, right? Like, we didn't pick we only picked the Bucky in this position because the other weapon is a little bit more expensive. The Judge will be more expensive overall and it will hurt you economic wise, right? If we're moving fast and your entire team is okay with making the push, the Stinger, again, like I said, it's still a weapon you can pick, right? But then you can start thinking about the Spectre a little bit more. I know I just said the Judge. The Judge is a little bit more expensive, but the Spectre is still at a respectable range that you can still pick, right? What about a niche, like a weapon that is fitting a particular niche? They're kind of interesting. So for example, we've seen it many times where people are picking weapons that fit the niche of maybe long range. And then you have 3 players stacking a site and just hitting, body shots at long range with the Marshall. That's a strategy you can try with your team. It's funny and it overall kind of ends up boosting morale more than anything, right? Things like, for example, the Ares, if you're someone that likes to play Sova or Cypher, maybe on something like Ascent, a really good weapon. Recently, it got buffed, so it's a lot better to use now, as you can hit headshots and still get kills around 30 meters of range, which is the majority of the sites when you're playing backside. Let's say you have a little bit more to spare, and this is where I would expect most players to kind of see where this is going. If you're someone that has won first round, for example, on pistol, and you got like 3 kills, invest. You know, maybe you're someone that doesn't require, you know, maybe the rifle and you don't want to buy the rifle, or you want to buy your full kit because you're someone that uses abilities a little bit more. The Bulldog, the Guardian, and the Outlaw are all weapons you can consider for your kit. Now, I would suggest instead for you to focus on something like the Bulldog for its ability to, you know, spray a little bit more, or the Guardian if you're someone that has been practicing those weapons in the range or maybe in a deathmatch. Those are the weapons for you. I always fall for the Bulldog because I think the Bulldog is a little bit cheaper and it's enough to kind of buy maybe a flash or maybe a smoke or anything like that. I think it's good for that type of stuff. Okay. So with that out of the way, that kind of concludes today. I basically just gave you my reasoning as to why I think the Sheriff's good. Okay. It's cheap, it's effective, it's good at medium to long range, and it's always going to be good when combined with teammates. You're never playing this alone, right? So if you're swinging off of someone, you're either going to hit them twice in the body or once in the head for 145, and someone's going to deal the final blow. Okay. Noticing weapon like strats like this where everybody's kind of sticking to the same side. Notice I don't even have to be focusing directly on hitting my shots. They're already respecting the Sheriff enough at this point, and we're able to use this to kind of take control of the map. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's call it here. Thank you guys for coming in. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know and put it in the comments. And then for everybody else here, question time is starting to open up. So, that out of the way. Thank you guys for watching.